Cool. Let's hit it.
Let's hit it.
We should be live. I don't know if that's something you notice on YouTube Live, but you click go live, and then sometimes I've done it myself, and I sit there for a minute before the whole
Yeah,
thing
it takes
kicks
about
off,
like
and then
20
I
seconds for
yeah,
it to
yeah,
catch up. Yeah.
it's a bit awkward sometimes. But we should be live, and people should hopefully hear us.
Well, hello out there in YouTube land.
Exactly. Welcome. For people who might not know Tom, welcome Tom. Composer, producer, kick-ass video game music, and I was actually listening to some of your soundtrack earlier today and earlier last week actually, and it's kick-ass music, man.
Thank you.
Especially like the Halo stuff, Prince of Persia. Listen to some of the Deathloop stuff, which is quite special also. So it's
Well, we're hoping for the soundtrack should be coming out soon. It's drips and drabs in various places.
yeah. So I found on YouTube. I don't know if that's the official release or not. Is it?
It's not the official. No, no. There will be like probably Spotify. Rumor has it there might be some vinyl stuff in the works. So, there's stuff working. The Bethesda's trying to get some stuff going there
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
for full, release.
Yeah, awesome, man. No, it's really cool.
Thanks.
Um, and it's something I've been wondering, like being like a composer like yourself, um, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but like my understanding of being a composer, making music for video games, or if it's like library music, music for commercials, that sort of stuff, um, is that you have to like flood the market essentially to make a living eventually from your music. I don't know if what your experience has been
Mm.
like. Is that
Well,
something like
that's
that?
certainly one strategy. There's the quantity strategy, but it's not necessarily true. Um, there are those that take the other strategy where they focus on strategy and very strategic, pinpointed um, releases and projects that they work on. Um, that I prefer that. I don't like to just be a music factory for the sake of flooding markets and making money. That's not why I do what I do. I did not decide to be a composer because I want to, you know, just this is the smartest career choice I could make to make money. That is not the reason I'm doing this. I do this because I love it. And when I find that I start to focus on the monetary value and, well, this is a moneymaker and this and this, then I lose it. It kind of sucks the creativity right out of the room. Quincy Jones had a quote once. He says, when it starts to be about the money, that's when God leaves the room.
Oh yeah.
And that was his point. It's just that magic, that thing that inspires really, truly great music just leaves. Now, that's all nice and good. We have to make a living. I get it, but we also have to do it in a way that fits with us personally. Um, I do library music, but I wish I was more motivated to do more of it. That's not really what drives me. I could be making a killing if I just spent every day just making movie trailers and saying no to video game soundtracks or saying no to other stuff. But um, I got to balance. You got to do what you really love,
Hmm.
and I'd rather spend my days just loving the art of creating and not just looking for that placement.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Not just that's not what it's about. That's
Right.
not why I do this.
Yeah. No, makes sense. But because I heard that you had some interesting stuff in the '90s. Like, were you keyboard tech? Is that correct?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, so folks, I've been professionally doing music for over 30 years. And so straight out of high school, pretty much first year of college, um, I got an opportunity to go on tour with the king of R&B, basically Bobby Brown. There was the king of pop, which is Michael Jackson, and then there's the king of R&B, which is Bobby Brown. So he was as big as you get. Um, and I had an opportunity to go on tour with him. They had their band already, and my job was to be the sound designer and keyboard tech.
Hmm.
So basically, what that means is I got to, travel the world with the band, and my job before the tour was started is to listen to all the music they would perform, every song, Listen to every sound. Don't be cruel, my prerogative. You know, Roni. Every song. Listen to every sound, and program every sound for all 5 keyboard players to play,
Right.
and then be able to push like one button for every song, and then it switches all their gear. Now, this is before computers were doing this stuff. You know, this is like all hardware and stuff. So I was way into electronic music and listening, critical listening, programming, that kind of stuff, and just being around that environment. It was just thrilling. And then I decided I wanted to be a record producer. I mean, from when I was in high school, my dream was to be a big famous record producer. You know, making records, working with big artists, and so that was my trajectory all through the 90s. So I worked on an array of every kind of music you can imagine, from classical to hip hop to jazz to hard rock. I even had a hard rock record I worked on, Go Gold, actually, believe it or not. So many different styles of music, remixes. That's when I was working with, I got a chance to work on Cher's album, the Believe album. I was working with Junior Vasquez, who was like, you know, one of the world's top DJ remixers. So I got a huge experience of doing a diverse array of music throughout the 90s. So that was a big part of my education, I think.
Right.
You know, the first decade.
Yeah. Did you ever get to work on the what's it called? Synclavier?
Oh, the Synclavier.
Synclavier?
Oh,
Yeah.
I had a picture of the Synclavier on my wall. You know, like
Right.
most kids like have like, you know, girls and cars. Yeah, I had the girls in the cars too, but then I had a Synclavier as well.
Right.
So a Synclavier is like, you know, it was like a $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 computer music workstation. This is before, you know, computers were, you know, before laptops and music software. This thing had it all. Stevie Wonder had one. I mean, you had to be a superstar, uber rich to have that. So no, I never had a chance to work on the Synclavier. And it's so funny. You fast forward now, and now you can buy a software plugin of the Synclavier with the original libraries and everything for, I don't know, $100.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
It's crazy.
so but yeah, that was the era that I grew up in, when it was like Synclavier, oh, Fairchild, oh,
Yeah.
you know, like Peter Gabriel used the Fairchild on the So album. You know, I'm listening, I'm like, oh my god, those sounds, it's amazing.
Yeah,
You know,
Now, I
I
mean,
was listening to that stuff.
so which synthesizer or keyboards were you programming in? Because, like you said, there was digital keyboards, obviously, but what was
Yeah.
the type of keyboards you worked on? Like, how did you program them? I mean, because you didn't use.
Yeah, well, for the tour, you mean? For the actual tour? Or
Yeah.
yeah, well, for the tour, the most common keyboard we had D70s for everybody. So a Roland D70 for everybody. I still have one of them over here on the side on my keyboard wall. Here, I can probably show you. Let me see.
Yeah.
Yeah, there it is.
Nice.
See?
Yeah.
Kind of like my little museum, my little feel-good museum. I don't actually use it, but it looks nice.
Yeah, it does.
So the D70s and a Akai S1000 was the sampler.
Right.
I had Kurdzwell 2500, which was a workstation, but it was in a rack. Yamaha, what was it? Yamaha was a controller. I forgot what it is, something 88 or whatever. Just a big controller, you know, just stuff like that. It was all early digital synthesizer days, you know, 1991, that kind of thing.
Nice. I mean, synthesizers is so much fun. Like, I'm trying to get into it myself, like slowly buying pieces, and hopefully eventually have like a modular synthesizer on the back wall.
I could see you starting in the back there.
Yeah, exactly.
Was that a log or something like that?
Oh, so that's just a Korg. Then there's like a Doper sequencer, and then there's like this. I just bought the Moog 32, the Mother 32 thing.
Yep. I had Mother. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm trying to get into it. It's really fun, like, because my background is like sound engineering. So I like the aspect of having to think before you can play, basically. You know, that's what I really enjoy. But did you ever get into modular synthesizers?
Oh yeah, I mean, I never got into modular,
right?
But synthesizers, oh, absolutely. My first one was a JX3P, In fact, I'm looking at it right now. I kept it. Summer of 1985.
Wow.
I got a used one. It was my first synth. And I've always had synths since that day. Every year, I would probably my dad would buy me another one, and I'd learn that those things inside and out. I knew every program. I could memorize everything in it, every knob. I really maximized every ounce of power from those things, trying to sound like the records and stuff that I loved.
Yeah, it's really fun, man.
Yeah.
It's really fun. But so going back to your keyboard days tech, so how come you stopped doing that? Was it to focus on like being a producer, or was you just ran his
Yeah.
course?
Yeah. I mean, touring was great, when you're 20,
Yeah,
21. It's awesome, but I didn't want to just end up there because that I didn't want to be a road dog, right? That wasn't the career I wanted. I wanted to be a record producer. So record producers aren't touring. They're in the studio. They're making the music, and then the artists will go tour. So it was fun. I got it out of my system. It was great, but I wanted more. I wanted to be a record producer. So I went into the studio, and that's what I did for the remainder of the 90s, from probably like 93 all the way to, 2000, 2001.
Right. And what happened in 2001 then? You decided to.
Oh, what happened in 2001? Well, things happened in
Yeah, it did.
2020. Well, besides 9/11, the whole world changed in many ways. 2001 is where high-speed broadband internet became widely available. Okay? So this is the first time that you're starting to see services pop up like Napster and LimeWire, and people started stealing music for free. They started downloading music. Okay? Me too. It was easy. It was like, how else? As I either drive in the car to go buy a CD, or I can just push one button and get like my favorite tune, right? It wasn't until 2003 that a genius like Steve Jobs figured out how to take this new technology and make it easier for people to pay for music than to steal it. And that was the invention of iTunes in 2003, if I got my dates right. So 2001, all of my dreams to be a record producer started to crumble because I'm like, wait a second, where's the money? I mean, again, I'm not doing it for the money, but if I'm going to be a big, famous, rich record producer, there's got to be money involved, and I got to be able to keep doing it. I have to pay the bills. So that was a very scary time. And looking back now, if you go into music industry and you look at the revenue and everything, it just tanked. 2001, it was like right over the top, and then boom. So I kind of felt that happening. I'm like, something's changing, and I need to find something else because this isn't working. So that's when, also in 2001, the Xbox came out. Halo came out. So we now had perhaps the world's best platform game on any console ever that just came out. And I was playing games like Rainbow Six and Prince of Persia and all that stuff. And in 2001, that's where I started really resonating with the music I was hearing. Because prior to that, the music was cool, but it wasn't like my style. Like Zelda music. I mean, it's cool, but it's not like, that's not my style. Mario, stuff like that. But in these more modern games, and especially some of the games that came from the West, I resonated with the music. I'm like, this is amazing. So I started feeling this like, wow, listen to that. The creative freedom, the sounds. And at the same time, I felt like the restrictions in pop music, it was like tying my hands. Every time I was working with an artist, they're like, no, that you can't use that sound, man. You got to sound like this, or it's got to be. I felt like I was in this little box. And meanwhile, I'm listening to video games. I'm like, that's freedom. So boom, all of a sudden, one day, it was like the clouds parted. I'm like, this is what I have to be doing. This combines the two things I love, music and video games. I was a gamer since the 70s, right? But it didn't occur to me until that one day. I remember it visibly. I remember where I was standing. Right. It was like, oh my God, this is it. But then I was standing in the den in my old house, right by the side back door. But thank you for asking.
Yeah,
it's true. I remember that. I remember. Yeah. And I ran upstairs to my wife. I'm like, I figured it out. This is what I got to be doing. But the thing is that's great. But it's like, okay, now what? I had 15 years of a career, and now starting over again. I had a mortgage, a wife, a kid. What am I going to do? I don't have any connections, video games. No one. So I went out to E3. I made like a whole bunch of what I thought was video game style music, you know, printed up 100 CDs. I went out there like, oh, yes, I'm getting ready for the welcoming committee. Tom Salta has arrived. You need me for your games, and no one cared at all, right? No one cares. Like, who are you? What is this nonsense? So I came home with my tail between my legs and about 100 CDs. And I'm like, okay, now what? How am I going to break into the industry? No one cared that I worked on the Share record. No one cares I worked on this and, whatever. So then I had to come up with another plan. So the plan was that, okay, so no one thinks composers are cool. Composers are nerds. I get it. Okay. Want to be composer, not going to happen. But artists seem to be welcomed with open arms. Like I'm seeing artists like that have no video game credits before start to show up in all these video games, like driving in sports games like Crystal Method and, Moby and Prodigy and Chemical Brothers. I'm like, wait a minute. No one knows who I am anyway. Why don't I just become an artist and make a whole album under a new name and get in the industry that way? So that was the plan. I hooked up with a publisher. I made an entire album of electronica big beat music that would be perfect for licensing in video games, TV, and film. I signed with a publisher, and before I was done with the record, Microsoft came by to my publisher and said, we want to license 4 tracks off this record into a new game called Rally Sport Challenge 2. So I was like, wow. And 3 of them were demos. 3 of them weren't even finished. So I'm like, okay, proof of validation right there. So I finished it up, and my first video game credit ever was Rally Sport Challenge 2 as Atlas Plug. Right. That's my artist name, Atlas Plug, released in 2003. It's still out there on Spotify. Go add it to your playlist. And it still gets licensed to this day. And that was my first and last solo album as Atlas Plug. I still want to do more. People keep asking me, and I'm like, I do, but I keep putting it off because it's like I'm doing all these other things, and it served its purpose, and it's still awesome, and it's still part of me, and I'd love to do more, but I'm there will be a time and a place.
Yeah. No,
so that was how we kind of got in.
Right. I mean, super interesting. So if we go back to those days where you figured out this is what I want to do, you go up, tell your wife, this is what I want to do. How are those next days? Because I imagine it's not as straightforward as you go up telling your wife, next day you have an album, next day you know. So what was?
No, it was hard.
Yeah,
that's a good question. It was I would never want to go back to that time. It was terrible. It was so scary. That time frame was it was probably like a year. It was one of the worst years of my life. I remember just being so scared, not knowing where the money was going to be coming from. My wife was working. She was the breadwinner in those days. And I'm like, I got to connect it. Something's got to happen. So I was so desperate for this to work that I called the album 2 Days or Die. All right. And for me, that would be a monument in my memory that I would never forget. So I never take for granted the success I might have after that. The point of 2 Days or Die is that it's a way of basically saying this has got to work super fast or I'm dead or it's over. Right. And that was it. So I called it 2 Days or Die. I even did a track called 2 Days or Die, and I did it in 2 days. And that ended up being the most successful track on the record.
Right. That's good.
So yeah, I mean, it's great to look back and like, oh yeah, but if I would never sit here or stand here and say that, oh, I knew it was going to happen and, piece of cake. No way. It was horrible. Right. It was horrible.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. But so how did you keep going at it at that year, then like not what kept you motivated, but what kept you disciplined, I should ask.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I tend to be a very persistent person,
Mm.
and that is also why I called my record label Persist Music.
Mm.
Because that I'm a big believer in persistence. In fact, there's a wonderful quote. Do I have it still on my shelf? Yes, I do. Hey, look at this. Yeah. So persistence is really my thing. This is by Calvin Coolidge.
Mm-hmm.
This is this is like my favorite quote on persistence.
Right.
So I won't leave it up there, but basically what it says is, nothing in the world can replace persistence. Talent can't, you know, genius can't, education can't, but only persistence is what it takes. And so that's one of my qualities. Another way of putting it is stubborn. But persistent is one of the things that has gotten me to where I am right now. And I think there's a bit of the carrot and the stick involved in this thing because, first of all, I had this idea of fear. Like, okay, well, if it doesn't work out, you're screwed. So you better get disciplined. You better, focus and make sure this gets done. But the thing is, I was always like that. I mean, I loved being in the studio. I mean, that's it's like my therapy, it's like I would be doing this for free anyway. In fact, that's why I'm doing it. I'm not really working. They say do what you love and then you never work a day in your life. I mean, yes, I work really hard and, I am disciplined and I know how to project manage and stuff. But the essence of what I do is who I am. It's creating music. So you don't have to force me to do that.
Right.
But I tend to be a very disciplined person. I'm very much into routines every day. I have, my set routines. I see everything as a marathon, not a sprint. And I'm in this for the long game.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I love that you bring
Yeah.
that up, the long game, especially because
Yeah.
that's super important, obviously. So, what is your routine like? How, let's say you're working on a new game and you're in the
Yeah.
middle of writing, let's say, or wherever in the process. But yeah, how does your day start and how does your day finish typically?
Yeah. These are good questions. In fact, I'm going to be giving a talk about this at Game Sound Con called uh, Surviving the Long Game, to talk about some of my perspectives on this. So I'm glad you asked because it's fresh in my mind. I'm still writing the talk.
Cool.
So working on a project, I got it first. The first thing to do is kind of get a bird's eye view of it. So let's just take Deathloop for an example. Okay, Deathloop. I get asked to do Deathloop. Wonderful, great. I have no idea what it is at the time. There's no, this before press. There's no proof of concept. You had no idea it was going to be a big thing. I just know that okay, I have this 50-page document, and it's going through all these ideas and whatever, and I got to decipher all of that and figure it out. So first thing is okay, how much music? When do they need it by? you know, and then you look at the calendar and I'm like, okay, so the end, like before the game goes gold, you have to be done. So I'm like, okay, so let me back that up. So that means I have to have. So I kind of look at it like that, and then I break it up into phases. And this is another thing I love to talk about. It's called. I talk about the creative process a lot. In fact, I mentioned this in my masterclass, Game Music Essentials, and I broke it up into 5 phases of creativity. Pretty much, I think it's 4 phases. But really, the first phase, which I think most composers skip, at least inexperienced composers, even myself, when you're anxious, it's like, oh my God, I gotta just get to work. They skip the most important phase, which is not creating anything, which is absorbing, which is listening. I see creativity as a breathe in and breathe out process. I think the whole world is in that kind of cycle. It's natural. We breathe in, we breathe out. The world turns. We have night, we have day. There's it just seems like it goes along with the rhythm of life and creating without getting too philosophical here. So one of the things I noticed is that when I give myself time to kind of absorb and pause and just absorb all these ideas and let them simmer and think about it, I do way better. I work way better, higher quality, more creative, and faster later,
Right.
as opposed to being like, okay, 30-minute score. Great. So I got, 2 months. That means I got to do 5 minutes a day and I got to start today with 5 minutes.
Right.
That is not the way you do
Right.
it. Certainly not the way I do it.
But so when, sorry to interrupt you, but when you
Yeah.
sit there and it simmers, um, what goes through your mind, and do you take notes, or what sort of thing happens then?
Yeah. Well, yes, I do take notes. That's the place where you kind of are receptive. So it's just about listening. So it could be something that comes to you at night. It could be something while you're watching a movie. And you're like, oh, I like that idea. I think that could kind of work for this. Or, when you start to be open and receptive, and you're like, okay, now I'm focused on this, and you start to look for ideas. So I might be listening to references music. I might be listening to old albums from that. In fact, that's exactly what I did. So the first phase is kind of like the input phase, right? The second phase is what I call the sandboxing phase. I've never heard anyone say that, but that's what I call it. And I like the word sandboxing, or the term, because it really connects with what's happening. And what I think should happen with all creatives is, little kids go into sandboxes, right? That's generally what we think of a sandbox. A little kindergartner goes into sandbox and, oh, this is fun. Wow. And you just start looking around and, start digging. You're not thinking, oh, well, I have to build a sandcastle better than this person, or what are they going to think? You give your inner child, your true self, a chance to just have fun. All right. Some of that might apply to the project you're working on, or it might work, but it might not work. Give yourself permission to just play in the sandbox. And that's what I do. All right. So for Deathloop, I was like, okay, after all listening to all these, hundreds of songs and things like that, I'm like, oh, I love this Wurlitzer, that Led Zeppelin on this, and I love this guitar sound, I love this bass sound, I love this drum beat, whatever. I have all these little things that have been simmering in my mind for days, weeks, whatever time I give myself. And now I'm like, I have all this creative energy. I'm like, oh, let's go. Come on, let's play,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I'll just go into the studio and start to go through all my sound libraries and synths and like, ooh, here's something cool. Here's something cool. And then what I start doing is like, I start grabbing, ooh, that's cool. Now put it in my knapsack, and my knapsack is my DAW. My DAW is like,
yeah.
I'll have this track, like I got that road sound and this thing. And then I end up with this thing of like all these sounds. And sometimes I get lost in a particular sound. I'm like, oh, it's so inspiring. So boom, boom, boom. And I start to make music and not really try.
Right.
And sometimes the best ideas I've ever had just comes from there,
Mm.
you know? And that's something that I've only started to do, I think, in the last, I don't know, well, to effectively in the last decade,
Right.
or maybe the last 7 years or something, where I've really got this sense of confidence, not in my ego, not an ego-based confidence, but more of a sense of trust and faith that if I just go with the flow and in a way kind of get out of the way, it just kind of works.
Mm.
You know what I
Mm.
mean? So after I do that, and sometimes I'll go through this and I'll have like 20 different ideas, and 18 of them might suck.
Right.
15 of them might suck, whatever. But some of them I might have some gems. And then I can start to go into the real phase, which is dipping the toe into the water. That's the third phase, where I start to, aim for specific targets.
Right.
Like I remember Deathloop, the first music I did was the Upper City, and I remember I was the first, like, okay, I love this idea. This is going to work. Let me try it out. And I did that, and it worked fantastic. But I didn't just start with there. It took me weeks to get up to the point where I'm like, gonna work. But when I did work, it's like, boom,
Mm-hmm.
comes right out.
Nice.
And that's the way I kind of like to do things. It feels like
Mm.
in line with the flow of creativity,
Right. No, but it does make
you
sense
know?
actually. Like, it's a really good idea. What you're saying, because I
Yeah.
didn't, even though I don't do music for video games and things like that, but um, when you do, maybe not, a time doesn't really matter, I guess, in certain degree. But if you just, let stuff simmer, think about stuff, and if some idea comes, you write it down. Maybe you use the voice memo app. It's full
Yeah,
full tons of
right.
ideas on that app. Um,
Sure.
Stuff usually goes better when you then actually sit down to do your music.
Yeah, and you got to divide it up.
Mm,
I'd say people ask me, well, how much time do you dedicate to that? It depends on how much time I have. But if you want to squeeze a number out, I'd say probably about 10%
right.
of the time I give to just that early phase where I don't do anything.
Mm,
And then maybe another, believe it or not, 15-20% to the sandboxing.
right.
Wait a second, that's like 30% of the time. I know,
Yeah.
but that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Because it makes the rest go better,
Yeah. Exactly.
you know.
But so, what's your conversation with the? I don't know if you call it game director or
Audio director, generally speaking,
right.
yeah.
Well, yeah. What's your conversation with them? Is it like you go through this phase of listening and taking notes, and then you make ideas, and is that the point when you send off stuff to them to check off or?
Yeah, so the I think what you're really asking is what's the dynamic
Right. Right.
between an audio director and a
Mm,
composer, and it's really, I mean, the audio director for me is my director. It's the person who I need to please, the person who I trust that understands the needs of the game. So the audio director is like the middleman between the game itself
mm,
and me,
right.
right? And there are audio directors come in all shapes and styles and forms. Some people are very experienced and know exactly what they want it to sound like, and they almost kind of tell you what to do. And then the other extreme is, look, you're the expert. Here's an Excel spreadsheet. Just go ahead and give us the music we need.
Right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Um, so, but in the case of Deathloop, Michelle, very, very experienced audio director in Arcane, and he created a 50-page document for me to explain the game, to explain the characters, to explain his ideas, the musical vision, the structure. So there was already a lot to go on, which is fantastic. It takes a big burden off me because I know this person knows what they want, but I also know from working with him previously on, what was it, Wolfenstein Cyberpilot, um, that he also gives a lot of creative freedom, which is wonderful. He's like the perfect combination. I think that's the best combination for an audio director, to know exactly what you want, but to also have an open mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. The worst combination, I think, is to not know what you want and to be very narrow-minded. That's like the worst, and that's happened too. Um, so yeah, so with him and I, basically, I would say, okay, I get what you're saying here. I love this idea. What do you? How would you treat this, or how would you deal with this, or do you have any thoughts on this, or I don't understand this? I try to understand and get into his head or her head first as much as possible.
Mm,
And then I'm like, okay, so does that answer all my questions? Do I have enough to go in, or are there some missing pieces in the puzzle?
right.
So in that case, I think there were some missing pieces in the puzzle. There was a lot of talk about sounds and instruments and maybe reference music for atmosphere and ambiance, but there wasn't too much stuff to go on when it came to the combat stuff, to the heavy, edgy, actiony
Mm,
stuff.
mm, mm.
And I knew Deathloop would need a lot of that. So that's where I said, okay, I'm going to go and just try to find some ideas for you, or create some ideas for you. And I want to get your take on it. So, I found some other reference music, because a lot of times it's quicker to find some reference music than spend
Right.
days
Right.
making it yourself, right?
Mm,
And plus you don't know where you're going to find inspiration. So I might say, oh, I love this beat. What do you think of this energy? What do you think of this? What do you think of this? What do you think of this?
mm,
And we kind of just come to a unified creative
mm.
vision. And then I do what I do, and we check in, and what do you think of this? And, oh, this is great. Oh, but could we make this a little more, or could you take this? Oh, I don't like that sound, but you know what I mean? And it just becomes this collaborative effort. That's really what it usually is.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Super interesting. But if I can go back to the playing the long game, like you said,
Yeah.
how did you realize that was the game to play, so to speak, rather than trying to do the opposite with like quick fixes, I guess. Does that make sense?
Oh, you're talking about that multi-phase process that I'm talking about, or what are you talking about? How do
Um,
I know that's the?
Yeah, I mean that's part of it, I think. But also, when you talked about the long game, I also interpret
Mm,
that as long game uh, that can be project specific, but also obviously your career as a whole.
career.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and your life, I
Okay.
guess. Um,
So you're saying, how did I kind of come to the realization that I really have to look at this career as a marathon rather than
yeah,
this crazy sprint to the
yeah,
top?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Uh, that's a wonderful question, and I think the answer is just by realizing that the alternative doesn't work. Okay, burning out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not a youngster anymore. I've been doing this a long time, and so I've crashed and burned, and I realized that in order, the people that I truly admire, and the musicians and the creative people and the leaders of the world that I admire, or just visionaries or just people in general, it's like, wow, how do they get all that done, and how do they still have so much energy? And how are you, day after day, decade after decade, how are you still, where's that coming from? And I think that was really what it is trying to figure it out, trying to figure out how to balance my life and how to find the correct source of energy, and identify what really matters and what doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
So I stopped worrying about a lot of things. Like, I stopped worrying about getting awards. Like, a lot of people, their whole career is like, okay, shit, I don't have I don't have a Grammy by now, or I don't have this. I got to have one. Otherwise, I'm a failure.
Right, right, right.
Right? It's like we set ourselves up by defining what equals success.
Mm-hmm.
So I think recalibrating our sense of what makes success is one thing. Just having that better, or that different perspective. Um, so that was one of the things I did. Another thing that really helped me a lot in life is, early in my career, I used to get intimidated, or used to see people, or say, if I'm talking to somebody at a company or game company, or as a potential, as like a client, as an opportunity, and not as a person.
Right, right.
You know, I would get nervous. I'd be like, oh wow, if I don't, I see them almost like I don't see their face. I just see the name of the company.
Right.
You know what I mean? And somewhere along the line in my life, I'm like, wait a minute, we are all people. We're all, that's just a regular person that, just like me, might have kids, might not have kids, goes to the bathroom, it's like we're all regular people.
Yeah, exactly.
And when I start realizing that, and start to relate to people as individuals and see them who they are, realize that we share the common existence as human beings, I just feel much more at ease with that. And when I go to conferences, somewhere along the line, maybe a decade ago, I stopped coming home stressed. Like, I used to get sick every time I went to a conference, because I'm like, oh, if I don't come home with 3 deals, I'm a failure.
Right, right.
It's like, no. When I go to conferences now, granted, I'm at a different place in my career, but I go to a conference, if I go, which I try to say no to as much as I can. But if I do go, my only goal there is to nurture my relationships and maybe build some new ones. It's more about just socializing and having fun and being yourself. I see a lot of young people. I'm like, oh man, that reminds me of me. They're like, oh my God, they're like running around. Hi, how are you? Hi, and the closer, and they feel that they're like trying to hand the person, and they think that it's successful if they hand them a business card. I'm like, no,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So all these things along the way. I mean, I could talk for hours on this kind of perspective change.
Mm.
But I think those are the top two: seeing people as people, and not and recalibrating your sense of success.
Mm.
You know, my purpose on this planet, which I finally come to realize, is it's just to positively affect people with my music and to share my knowledge.
Mm.
That's it.
Yeah,
That's it.
exactly.
If I get, an Emmy or 5 BAFTAs or whatever, that's great. But that's not what it's about, because that stuff gets dusty, and I get more of a thrill. I remember after I had kids, and this helped me, because when you have kids, you also recalibrate your priorities in life. I remember I remember the feeling where my son, I don't know, maybe he was 10, 9, 8, doesn't matter. he saw me sitting at a panel signing autographs, and he came up, and on the side he wrote, like where it had my credits, he wrote, "That's my dad," with an like, and he had this sense of pride. I'm like, oh, I melted.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that that feels so amazing to me, more than like any award that I've ever won. And that's what life is about. Just that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah.
it's I love this conversation because I went through something similar like last year because the pandemic hit, as we all know, and before that I was making living, yes, working with bands, live shows, whatnot. But I was super caught up in, oh, how much money did I make this year? How much money did that person make?
Oh
Do
yeah.
I have more clients than this other guy or whatever, you know? And then the
Yeah.
pandemic came and all that went away. And I was fortunate to do like I don't know if you're familiar with Tony Robbins.
Oh yeah, I did all his stuff in my 20s. Absolutely. Personal power. Everything. I was Tony Robbins freak.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I've been sort of also. And yeah, last year I got to do the event. What was it called? Unleash Your Power Within, I think it's called. So
Yeah.
it was online, obviously, because of the pandemic. But that whole event, like one of the most significant things was that I was seeking significance rather than, I guess you know all this, but yeah, fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
And since I learned that slight difference in what was important, all that stress of having to be like, oh, I need this much money for music, I need to have this many clients, whatever. When all that went away, it was so much easier, and it rings true to what you were saying also. Like I can see a lot of myself in that because I used to go to conferences, networking events, and I was like that. I got to give cards away. I got to have this number, this opportunity tomorrow, and yeah, when you learn how to differentiate between those, like what's important to you, really, it really helps. So I love that
Yes.
you have that experience also.
Yeah. I used to literally get sick every GDC. I'd come home and I'd be sick for a week. And now I come home when before the pandemic, I don't get sick at all. I just keep going. It's like nothing ever happened. And it's all in here. It's all perspective change.
Yeah,
It really is.
yeah, it is. It's super valuable when you learn it. You know.
Yeah, that's right. And it takes some time, and also hearing from people that have lived through it, that are willing to talk about it and communicate and understand it. So that's why I'm so motivated now to also share my knowledge at this point in my life. In addition to my music, that's just a sidecar to what I do. So I kind of take it with me. And I think just the idea of helping pull people up and help those, in the place that I was, I'm like, I just don't want to see you make the same mistakes or waste the time that I did and trying to help people. So that's also why I released my whole Masterclass series. It's just try to, put it out there and have a platform to share knowledge with everyone.
Yeah, no, that sounds awesome, man. And people should definitely
Yeah.
check it out. I'll leave a link to that below also after the stream.
Sure.
So you can click.
Yeah, and also I'll give I can give you guys an exclusive discount code as well. After we're done, I'll make one for you, and we can share so they can get additional discounts off. I'm just about to release the Deathloop master class too, 7+ hours on it.
Cool. Yeah. Share that with me, and I share that with the people.
Yeah.
Awesome. But so then going back to the music part, so for people who want to get into composing music for games, because I don't want to ask like what your tip is, because I think that there's a better question to ask. But in terms of how you did it, like you got a publisher, then you got into the Microsoft thing. I mean, was that through the publisher? Like, is the publisher the key these days, or what's the process like?
Well, if you're talking about licensing, which isn't going to apply to all of your listeners, but if you're talking about licensing, meaning I create the music first, and then I try to get it licensed, placed, into other things. Not as, and usually those are non-exclusive as well. Like Atlas plugin, Crackdown same music is also in Project Gotham, is in other games as well. So talking about licensing, yes, that stuff usually happens through either a publisher or a company like that license music. So at the time, this was a relatively new company. Now they're much bigger, and it's a whole different dynamic. But at the time, I was one of very few artists that they signed, and he had a direct relationship with the head of licensing, music licensing for Microsoft. So, that was the door in. These days, I think the most practical advice is don't try to follow, someone's path exactly. What's that movie? Oh, that Marvel movie that came out with it was the Chinese one where the new one, I forgot what it was, and to get to that place you had to like run through the forest at the same exact right time at the same path, and don't do it that way. The way I'd say is these days now in 2021, anyone, especially artists who could create their own music, have a worldwide viewing audience for their music. So I'd say stop waiting for the door to knock. Stop waiting for someone to give you permission or to ask for something. Create the music you want to create. Put it out there. Put it out on YouTube and put it on Spotify and sign with DistroKid or whatever it is, or CD Baby. Do what you want. Just get your stuff out there and start to share it. Start to share it around. Build an audience. Why? Well, because eventually it's good. If you're persistent, it's going to be seen by the right people, the people who want it. And there's a market for pretty much any kind of music out there. That I don't care what you're doing. You could be doing Celtic metal. I mean, there's a market out there for it. So why not? And why not? It's also very good for musicians in general to diversify their income streams. I honestly don't know of any composer at all, including Hans Zimmer, who does only one thing to make money.
Exactly.
There are always multiple revenue streams. Okay. So in the case of someone like myself, those revenue streams are going to be scored, score music, work for hire assignments, things like that. I'm commissioned to do these things. And that's what I guess I'm most known for now. But behind the scenes, I'll be also doing major corporate stuff. I've done stuff for Coca-Cola. I've done stuff for John Deere. I don't know, you name it. I mean, I've done a lot of things that you'd never even know I'm doing. I work with artists. I songwrite. I have songs out there as well. My goodness, I'm working on some other album things. There's a lot of things in the work. My license, my movie trailer music. I still have stuff even Atlas Plug is being licensed still. I still receive, royalties and performance royalties from that. So in other words, just don't worry. Don't chase the money. Let the money find you. You have to kind of create the music. That's your job. To also put on your business hat and think, okay, what are some things that fall in place with what I love to do and what I'm really good at?
Exactly.
Be yourself. Be, better than the rest, or be the best you can be. And it'll just be persistent and give it some time. It takes time.
Yeah, it does. Like going back to the long game, it's a marathon.
Yeah. I mean, look, some people, it just clicks, man. They go from rags to riches. That's fantastic. But it's not always like that.
No, exactly.
It's usually not. Very, very rare.
Exactly. Yeah, it's good to remember that actually, that it takes time. Definitely.
Yeah, it does. And I'm much more about, again, the long game. I'm much less about a flash in the pan. Shakespeare was right. I forgot exactly the quote, but the faster the candle burns, or the brighter the candle, the quicker it goes out. Right. I just butchered, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah. The sentiment is the same. It's also like the tortoise and the hare.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You want the rabbit? You want to be the rabbit? It's like, yeah. And then the tortoise. I'm the tortoise. I'm like, here, come on. I'm there. I'm not stopping.
Yeah.
Been 30 years. I'm still going. You burnt out. I'm not.
Exactly.
So that's the way it is.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. Because there's so many people in the music industry that are just burned to death. Like I work for some people, and I don't want to work 12 hours.
They lost their soul.
Yeah.
Like they don't have fun anymore. And I see this a lot in Hollywood composers. Oh my God. Yeah. It's like they thought they wanted to work on these, and they're just shells of themselves.
Yeah.
I'm not saying everyone's like that, but I see it more often than not. Or they work so hard at climbing that ladder, and they get to the top of the ladder and they realize the ladder's on the wrong wall.
Yeah, exactly. No, definitely. Super true. But Tom, but like last question, because I know you also have to do some stuff after this, and we saw Miss
Yeah, I got
Synthesizer
some
now.
to do. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But last question before we wrap up.
sure.
So do you have a favorite failure? Could be in your career, could be in your life. We touch on some of the stuff, but a favorite failure
Uh,
that set you up for success later on.
woo! These are really insightful questions. My goodness. Favorite failure. Man. Wow. Well, Atlas Plug was not that was one of the leap of faith. That was the biggest leap of faith that I ever took. That could have been a failure, and it wasn't.
Mm.
Um, I have failures constantly throughout my career. It's like I'm trying to even think of them. Like, which one was the big one? Like, was there a big failure? I don't think I had a big. I could be wrong, but I can't think of a big failure. What I can think of is a time in my life where it kind of all crashed and burned.
Yeah.
And it wasn't seen on the surface. It wasn't like, like I disappeared from the scene for a year. But I went through a 10-year period, I'd say, honestly speaking, if I'm going to be completely vulnerable here, I went through a 10-year period where I really doubted myself. And I felt I wasn't good enough. I was, like you said, I was comparing myself and this and that. I went through this, and it all led to a point where I basically just mentally crash and burned. Like I can't do it anymore. This isn't fun. This is a nightmare. Where did my creativity go? Where did the golden goose go? And it forced me to almost like do a clean install of an operating system
Mm.
in my mind. You know what I mean? It's almost
Yeah.
like that's it. It's dead. I can't upgrade it anymore. This is as far as I can take this. And yeah, I think that happened around 2013.
Right.
So I can't say it was, like a big project that was a failure. Like I don't have any big projects that like, oh, that score was abysmal and I'm embarrassed about it.
Mm.
Um, but it was more internal. It was more of a personal journey, a more of a crash and burn kind of point, which set me up to now be in mentally, life wise. Thank God, I feel in a much better place, probably in the best place I've ever been,
Right.
in my life.
Mm.
And I don't mean that in any way like, oh, financially, because I make, no, no, no. It has nothing to do with finances. It has nothing to do with the number of projects. It has nothing to do with the number of awards. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's all me being connected with that same true self that I was when I was in 8th grade.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like that, just that raw, like excitement of being able to wanting to create where anything's possible, before you get jaded, before you grow up, and you know you know before Facebook came,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's another thing
yeah.
that came like in 2001. I think I mean, it's been proven that causes depression
Yeah, I
in a
can see
lot of
why.
people.
I can see why. Definitely.
I love to get off of it entirely. I
Yeah,
think
same.
I just want to. I wish I just had someone else to do it for me, because I don't
Yeah, yeah.
I don't use it. Oh, what's going on with this person? I just use it just for public.
Mm, mm.
But yeah, I'm sorry to give you that kind
No,
of
that's the perfect answer.
non-satisfying answer. It was really just a time in my life where,
Yeah.
yeah, this isn't working anymore, and I had to kind of install a brand new operating system in my head.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect answer. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
But yeah, Tom, pleasure. Thank you for coming on. I really enjoyed talking
Thanks.
to
Yeah,
you.
it went fast.
Awesome. Let's end this stream, and thanks to everyone who was watching. See you another day, another time. Thank you, Tom.
Bye bye.
Cool. That's ended.